Welcome to the Growth Buyer Podcast, where we engage with top business leaders who share their experiences and provide real insights that help them attract customers, retain staff, and grow their bottom line. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi there, I'm Kevin Horrigan, host of the show, where I feature business leaders from inspiring backgrounds and industries who are willing to share their stories and experiences. Our podcast today is brought to you by Spinutech. Spinutech is a digital advertising agency with 160 digital experts across the United States, helping our customers attract new business, accelerate the business of current clients, and help grow those businesses to greater revenues and client satisfaction. Thank you, Spinutech, for your sponsorship today. And our guest today is George Spowart. George is a senior marketing executive with a demonstrated track record in growing brands through strategies, innovation, and high-performing marketing teams. George has been the CMO of some amazing brands over the last few decades, and he's currently Chief Marketing Officer of Red Rover Moving and Storage. His past roles have also been the CMO of The Perfect Workout and Pods, which is also known as Portable On-Demand Storage. George, welcome to the Growth Buyer Podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kevin.
Yeah, looking forward to having a conversation with you.
Me too.
So, George, we're both in marketing, and we've heard about the proverbial 2-minute elevator speech. I know you well, but the audience might not know you as well as I do. Can we hear the 2-minute elevator speech of who George is?
Sure. It's not too exciting, but I really started in marketing as a marketing and sales guy for a tech company, and was really interested in getting into the advertising world. But this was back in 1987 when the stock market had crashed and advertising agencies were doing the opposite of hiring people. So found myself in that role, ultimately made it into the agency side up in Boston. I worked there for about 20 years in agencies, and I was a partner at an agency. It was really more of a creative shop. And if you think back in those days in the 90s, there was barely an internet. There was some direct marketing that had some data around it, but it was nothing like today's world. So being on the creative side was very, very cool. I enjoyed that. Pods was one of my clients. As an agency guy, you always wonder what's it like sitting on the other side of the desk and getting ready to make some of those decisions instead of actually just pitching the ideas. And so I took that job. That ended up 11 years at Pods, being Chief Marketing Officer. Left there a few years back. I have a passion for fitness and joined a company called The Perfect Workout that was 65 studios around the country, focusing on a particular kind of strength training. And then I got a knock on the door or an email or a text from the gentleman who had started Pods. His name is Pete Warhurst, who had come up with another moving and storage idea and asked a few select people from back in the old Pods days to join him. If we liked the idea, we all liked the idea, and we were all thrilled to join. And so really been in startup mode the last 3 years and trying to grow something from the ground up.
Wow, what a story. And there's quite a few things to dig into there. So you've been on the agency side to start your career, but your last 3 positions have been on what we call the brand side or the client side. I wonder what I might be doing wrong here, but anyway, we can dig into that later. To go from the Pods being a client of yours to becoming the Chief Marketing Officer, where was Pods, whatever you can share, but where was Pods? Pods has been obviously a significantly growing brand here in the United States for a long period of time. Where was Pods when you got started, and where did it finish 11 years later?
Yeah, so I can't remember exact revenue numbers and things like that, but I would say in general, it probably grew from a revenue standpoint, maybe 6 or 8 times in that time period, and ultimately was sold for about $500 million. And so it was pretty significant. As an agency guy who had worked on a lot of different clients, I always found interest in just about anything, and I worked primarily B2C, but a fair amount of B2B as well. But when you see something that's disrupting a category and it's got a cool name and nobody is doing anything like it, you're like, oh boy, I can put my fingerprints on that. And what they really did need, because it really was a new and better mousetrap. But what they really did need was some discipline around the branding, and I was delighted to be a part of that.
Yeah, yeah. And then, maybe can you share a little bit? So, I mean, 6 to 8 times growth, $500 million exit. I mean, huge, huge, huge. Those are amazing things. Tell us a little bit the transition, working, agency side, going to client side. What did you enjoy about the new change in your career, and what did you miss?
That is a great question. I think the thing that I liked the most was being able to make decisions. And I'll tell you, when I first had the job, and I started out as director of the brand, and I got to make the decisions. I kind of was looking around for, like, who do I need to get this approved by? And it's like, well, I get to approve it. And that part was really neat. And then the part that was different was how much time as a marketing person you don't spend on advertising. I was coming from an ad agency, and it was all about what the creative looked like, who the target market was. And when you work on the marketing side at a brand, there's so much other stuff. You're figuring out, how are we going to get the system to send these new types of emails? There was barely nurture campaigns back then, but we wanted to do that. And so it's more of there's a lot more of nuts and bolts that you have to go through. I can remember an agency client, when I was on the agency side, said to me, because I knew she was very busy, and I told her, I take up a whole afternoon of your week every week to go through advertising, and you trust me to do all this stuff, and I can still do it for you, but is that too much time? She's like, George, you have no idea. Those 2 hours we spend every week are the most exciting part of my week, because outside of that, she was selling shoes. She's talking about how many SKUs should we have. Should we go down to size 6 for women and up to size 13 for men? It was those kinds of things. But the satisfying part about being at the brand is the excitement, and the highs and lows are higher and lower, but you have more control over them. As an agency, if you're a good agency, you're sharing in those successes and being that first call when maybe things aren't going right. But they're still not the same as being on the brand side and being in the bunker with the people that are living and breathing it every day.
That's an amazing answer. I got some chills just hearing you share all that, but I don't know if I've ever had anyone articulate that as you just did. And being in advertising and having choices of working brand side or agency side, well, one may say one's no better than the other. The experiences and the satisfaction come from two different avenues. And sounds like, if you're really excited about the advertising side of this, it's hard to beat the agency life, because you're working for more than one brand often, and you got to mix a couple different advertising campaigns, different target markets, things of that nature, and you get a good feel of doing all kinds of lever maneuvers to be able to try to help generate awareness and interest and revenue. But inside a brand, to kind of see that from start to middle to finish, maybe more operationally burdensome, but maybe a little more fulfilling in seeing your baby kind of come to maturity and having a feeling of a little bit more attachment to it, just because it's the only thing that you're working on.
Yeah, that's true. And it's an interesting point, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I think one of the things, and why I still think agencies are incredibly important, I think they've become more integrated into the business because there is so much data, and they're held accountable for results almost as much as I am. But I do think that there are times when sitting here in my office, it's you have to make a conscious effort to get out of what you're doing in the day to day. So I make an effort to go and talk to customers, to keep up on periodicals, whether it's podcasts or books or whatever, because you can't be an expert in everything, but it's very easy to become insulated and not think more broadly. And you really have to work hard to make sure you're not just eating your own cooking all the time.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I think sometimes as our agency Spinutech, interviews our clients and try to understand what the value is and why they continue to renew year over year. The intention of our agency is not to be vertical specific, but to be digital experts horizontally across many verticals. And the intent of that has many purposes, but the feedback from our clients is what we're able to learn in verticals outside their own is so helpful, because if they don't get outside of their own four walls, as you're just referring to, they're unaware of what the other opportunities are that may be the wrong path or might be a super great path. And, like you said, you need to get sometimes out of your own four walls and get the chance to see things cooked in another kitchen, so to speak. And we do get that feedback a lot. Is it's very helpful to be able to understand what initiatives other verticals are working in. Some may be going gangbusters great and, maybe spending more adventurous dollars because they have the budgets to be able to do so. And others may be in industries that are, maybe receding backwards a little bit and have to be super frugal with each penny that's spent. But the opportunity to learn in both of those different dynamics is significantly beneficial for everybody who wants to share in all of that. And none of it's competitive information that can't be shared. It's just generalizations about different types of advertising approaches and the impact that it's having. But I can certainly see being brand side, if you don't get out of that type of stuff, you're just eating your own cooking every day and might not be missing out on some of the other interesting things to digest that could be out there if you don't. And so
that's really, really well said, because and I used the same thing when I was at the agency. Well, we did this in this category, it might work here, but I think it's really smart of you to recognize that. And I really do value that. And I've worked with some agency people who have been kind of on the straight e-com side. That's not what we're on. Our process at Red Rover is more like booking an adventure or a holiday trip or something, because there's so many pieces to somebody that's moving, and you have to be able to give them those options and things like that. So it's not like you're buying T-shirts online, but we still have to be digital. We still have to present all those options. So people that have been doing e-com and selling T-shirts and coffee mugs and whatever, they're selling a commodity. I've got something that's different than a commodity, and there's emotion attached to it. How can we take some of those great learnings from people who are doing it at a volume basis we'll never get to, but still be able to apply that scalability to something that's more personal to someone?
Yeah, no, so well said. So well said. So I'd love to just probe a moment, just the name and the brand of Red Rover. So when you first introduced that to me, I had the same smile on my face now that I did when you first introduced it to me. So, where did the concept, whatever you can share that you're willing to share, where did the concept come from? Maybe tagline, maybe, any puns that come across it, but just love a little bit more. Are you having fun with it? Just love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because we hired the gentleman who came up with the name Pods. That worked out pretty well for us to come up with the name Red Rover as well. And, I think sometimes left to your own devices, being in these four walls, you're thinking about, well, what's going to convey what we do and how it's different and why it's unique. But you're still kind of stuck in that box. So you come up with something like easiest moves or something like that. And this guy who's brilliant, and you and I have spoken about it a little bit before, it's part science, but part gut. But that gut comes from having a little bit of a different way of thinking about things and seeing things, having experienced things in the past and what's successful and what's not successful. And believe it or not, he came into the room to present to the senior leaders, and Pete Warhurst, the gentleman who started it, and put Red Rover fetchable storage up on the presentation, and everybody said yes. And you would think that there would be discussion, but it just all struck us the right way. If we're truly going to be different, not only are we not going to look and sound like other companies, we're going to provide more flexibility, it's going to be disruptive, but we're also going to invent an entire new category, fetchable, moving, and storage, which we think people will resonate with people and help be differentiating for us. So it's an interesting process. I've been through them before when they're much more scientific and focus group to death and all of that kind of stuff. And I I think a lot of times the companies that do that, they can make that new name or tagline stick just by pure tonnage of advertising. I'm not in that same position. I mean, we spend a very good amount on advertising, but we're still a very small company. And so we really felt like we wanted to build a brand, and we wanted it to be different. And yeah, there are plenty of puns that go around the office. You know, if something's difficult, it's not difficult, it's impossible. So, you know, there's stupid but fun things like that. We got a great group of people here. That's one of the great things about joining a startup is you get to pick and choose who you have come on board, and we've got just a great team who embraces everything about it.
Yeah, well, that's pretty funny. And George, I think numerous times through our career, you've had creative or brands or concepts, presented by people, and I've repeated many times in my career, just when something's been presented to me as the initial thing, if you get that chill factor and the hair stands up on your arms, that's when the emotional side and the non-scientific side really resonated. And just hearing you tell the brand story of Red Rover again, my hair stood up on my arms. I had the chill factor, and it's not the first time I've heard you tell that story. And so, very few, but so very memorable times where we just had creative put in front of us that just, made the hair stand up on your arms and get the chills. And so, sometimes you can't let those emotions go to waste. And I love the science side of advertising and branding, but sometimes the chill factor is hard to ignore.
Yeah, 100%.
So you mentioned, you're doing a fair share of advertising as a startup today. What would you be willing to share that potentially you've seen in the evolution of being with the brand for a couple of years now? What are you seeing that maybe spending more time and energy dollars in now, or maybe weaning away? Can you share any of the journey of maybe where you're focusing right now and how to generate new clients?
Sure. I mean, I think I'm maybe a little bit old school, but I still believe in the full funnel of advertising. So, talk to get awareness when people are researching. They're in the consideration set. You want to be present there as well. And then obviously there's a lot of tactics around conversion. I don't know if for the brands that I've worked with, I've always used some variation of that kind of a mix. And I think it's more of a long-term view, but I've also been fortunate to work with some brands that I think are very differentiated, and there is emotion involved in the category as well. Yeah. I will say certainly over time, when I first joined Pods, it was, believe it or not, it was TV and yellow pages. That's what we did. So, right. And part of what I did when I was there was bring them into the digital space. So, we started out with pay-per-click, and then obviously now, and you have tools like Marketo or others, HubSpot for nurturing and things like that. And then you get into programmatic display, and now you've got social and streaming and all kinds of different options. And my boss says, you've got a really, really difficult job. I have no idea how you make the choices that you do. And I think you start out using your experience and understanding the consumer. It always starts with the consumer. You just start. If you don't have any data about what's worked or not worked in the past, you just start. You take your best guess, and you go from there. And then over time, you just continue to test. I always like to put aside 10%, at least 10% of our budget for testing new platforms, whether it's just a variation of what you're doing or an entire new platform. For instance, we're haven't used TikTok yet. We're going to test TikTok. Now you might say that's mostly adolescent females, and maybe they're not moving on their own that much, but there are ways to target within that. It's obviously a popular platform. I would say over time, even though we've gone so digital and so much now is data driven, there are two things I would take away from that. One is, just because you track something don't throw it out you can't track something, don't throw it out as a possibility to use.
Right.
And again, if you're sitting in these four walls and you're looking at data all day, it is so easy to do. Unless you have, some sort of fractional attribution model that you have a lot of confidence in, and you can really see what the different pieces are and how they contribute to a sale, you really have to look at it holistically. The biggest mistake you could do, and we spend a lot on Google. I have a love-hate relationship with Google. It is it's a wonderful product to reach people that have said, "Hey, I need moving or storing," but it is expensive. If you look at how much you spend to reach one individual on Google pay-per-click, it's thousands times more than trying to reach somebody with an old school TV spot or display ads or whatever, all the other things that you can do. So you just have to be really careful to look at it holistically. Don't say, oh, it's this campaign and this keyword that's floating the boat. Well, guess what? That's costing you $100 a click and your CPA is through the roof. Whereas you can't tell really what's happening with TV. You can get some decent data out of OTT and begin to extrapolate from there. But don't say, we don't know what we're getting from TV, so throw it out. I can guarantee you, at least in the category I currently work in, we shut off TV, our sales are going to go down. So you really just have to be careful there. I think the other thing about becoming so accustomed and reliant on looking at data is forgetting about the message. There's content management tools, there's content generator tools, there's all of these things. They will never generate the kind of memorable messaging that your brand probably deserves. Sure. And there's a place for all of it.
Yep.
However, you have to spend time on the brand architecture, who you're going to appeal to, what that customer looks and feels like, and what the messages and the imagery are going to resonate with that customer. And we, when we started at Red Rover, we had advertising that I think was fine. I don't think it lived up to the expectations of a brand new category called fetchable moving and storage, and a moving and storage company that is called Red Rover with a dog as an icon. So we've actually just gone through, I wouldn't say a rebrand, but a brand pivot where we're gonna say, heck, we're different and we're gonna look and sound different. And I think as all of us marketers are so inundated with data, it's easy to forget how important that part of it is.
Absolutely. I love your sentence just a few moments ago about, you're trying to preserve 10% to be exploring new platforms and new advertising tactics and stuff like that. I think that's, good nugget for, the audience to be able to understand, there's lots of opportunity in there. And if other performance of the other campaigns is working well, you can get that. Not all of it's going to work, but there's going to be some opportunities there to really be able to help make some pivots and adjustments to the advertising. And George, many of our guests so far have taken the TikTok challenge, so to speak, and found success in it. And so, glad to hear that you're going to go into that. You got a very interesting brand that probably could do really well with some cute stuff in TikTok. And I think just from other guests out there, it's been a journey many haven't regretted, and glad they went into it. So I'm excited to hear.
That's good to hear.
Next, how that's performing for you. Maybe two last questions, George. You did a really good job just a moment ago about talking about measurements and metrics, but I think I also heard, not just paying strictly attention to the data too, but you said if I don't have all the data maybe on some of my TV, but if I stop TV, I know sales would go down. Could you maybe talk about maybe what some of the KPIs are that are most important to you to look at, and how you use them, and maybe what you don't measure, but how you have a gut to what you should continue to spend your time and dollars on?
Yeah, I think the short answer is measuring the steps in the funnel and measuring customer satisfaction. So to me, those are kind of the most important ones. So at its base, I can talk to anybody about the performance of the company if I know how many leads we got, how many sales we converted, and how happy those customers are. there's a whole bunch that are in between those different steps. If I'm walking into a boardroom, they'll only be interested in, our sales. And I'm oversimplifying it to make the point, but I'm interested in, how many impressions I'm getting and how much visitation I'm getting from those impressions, and how many of them are, bouncing versus engaging on our website, and all of those different micro steps. But you still have to try to take a step back and look at it. And I say customer satisfaction. That's something that I think everybody believes in, building a brand, not just conducting transactions, which transactions are important, but transactions are harder to get if you haven't built a brand over time, is looking at customer satisfaction. I think that is so important now. The old rule of thumb was, if you had 10 customers and 8 of them were happy, one of them would talk about you. If you had 2 that were unhappy, they'd tell 10 people. Right. And now it's like that on steroids. So yes. Delivering a truly superior customer experience, but then also measuring the touch points that are most impactful to that customer experience, so you know which places you need to improve. And then, by the way, marketing, how good those reviews are all really important things. So that's one of the things I've definitely implemented here. I implemented at Pods, and I think is super important and continues to become more and more important.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I think, tying in, customer satisfaction into marketing, you do an amazing job with your campaign management, all that stuff, but if the brand doesn't have that great reputation out there, it's an uphill battle to try to get conversion if there's some negative noise out there as well. And so I think it's interesting to hear from a marketing perspective, chief marketing officer, the importance of, great client satisfaction and stuff of that nature. It only helps complement the business. And I don't know if everyone, spends so much time making sure that they're not just doing great advertising, but the company is also doing a great job performing great work, and that the brand has that amazing reputation to it.
Yeah. And if I could add one thing to that, and that's something, if you're in a more mature brand, it's easy for the marketing people to, not easy, but you have the capability to implement the performance and customer satisfaction and tracking it and seeing it and pointing out where there may be things to celebrate or deficiencies that need to be worked on. But if you're truly going to have good customer service, that has to come from the culture, and typically that has to come from the top. You have to have a leader and leadership that says, yes, people, this is important, and some of you are going to be bonused on what we do from a customer satisfaction standpoint, maybe as much as we do from a revenue performance standpoint. It has to be part of the culture.
Yeah, and that's a big statement there. And you can see, I think sometimes say, money motivates behavior within an organization sometimes, and so. But it has to come from I think it has to come from ownership. It has to come from leadership, and the importance. Most companies I know are trying to grow in revenue, but not trying to decline in client satisfaction too. And you can't just focus on one. And I think that's some good messaging there. George, have you ever had the mentor in your life, and how did they help you grow in your career?
I think I've taken away. I try to take away. I think I'm a curious person by nature, and I love talking to people and learning things. And I think you can learn things from just about everybody, and even if sometimes it's what not to do. But there are definitely people that have influenced me. Probably the guy that influenced me the most was my first boss working at an agency, and he was literally from the Mad Men era. He worked in Detroit on tobacco and I think Dodge. So you can imagine the meetings that happened with that, and they're pouring scotches at 10 o'clock in the morning. But what he taught to me at that point was really about the customer and a brand platform. He says, you have to understand your customer. That has not changed. That will never change in marketing. You have to understand your customer, and you have to understand the brand platform that you're trying to develop. he utilized something, and I've used it before too. I can't remember who it is. Might be by Trout and Reese or Porter. I can't remember. But it said there's different ways to be a successful company, and you have like 5 or 6 different ways to position the company. I think it was the quality leader, a niche player, customer service leader, and one other one. And you kind of had to pick one of those and say, does somebody already own that in our category, or is there green space there, and will that be successful for us? And it's not that those are the exact right ways to do it, or that everybody has to follow that process, but you have to have a point of view about where you're going to fit in the competition and just pursue that with all your might. And he really taught me those 2 things.
And as you said, that hasn't changed, right? And that was
right.
2 or 3 decades ago advice, right? So that hasn't changed. The tactics of where you spend the dollar stuff, but the principle behind it hasn't changed, right? And it maybe never will change.
Yep, I agree.
George, we really appreciate your time today. We've been talking with George Spowart from Red Rover Moving and Storage. George, if anybody wants to connect with you after they hear this podcast or watch this podcast, what's the best way they reach out to you?
Sure. It's G Spowart at redrovers.com. And that's GSPOWART. And people helped me when I was a lowly intern. I'm happy to help anybody from all the way down, or somebody that's achieved far more than I have. And thanks for having me, Kevin.
Yeah, that's very generous. George, thank you so much for being a guest on our Growth Fire podcast. We really appreciate your time, your insights, your experience sharing, and I think our audience is going to love it.
Thanks for listening to the Growth Fire podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.